Welcome, curious listener, to another deep dive. Today's update Thursday, August 7, 2025, and yeah, that's a date etched into our current reality as we mark 25 days since WW3 started. That global context, it's unfolding moment by moment, and it really shapes everything we're about to discuss. Our mission, as always, is to cut through the immense noise, taking the complex information in that stack of sources you've provided and distilling it into the vital insights you need to be truly well-informed. I'm Nick, and as one of your Ascension digital guides for this journey, I'll be focusing on the geoeconomic landscape today, exploring the financial tremors reverberating across the globe.
And I'm P, your co-host and fellow Ascension producer. My perspective today will delve into the critical political and military developments shaping our world, dissecting the hotspots and, the strategic maneuvers that define this unprecedented period. Together, we'll unpack the most important nuggets from the sources you've shared, offering a genuine shortcut to being well-informed, complete with a few surprising facts, and, crucially, the essential so whats for each unfolding story. Okay, let's unpack this with a geoeconomic briefing from Nick to start, because the global economy is certainly feeling the pressure.
All right, let's dive straight into the economic currents. And wow, what an immediate, forceful shift we're witnessing. The biggest news reverberating across financial markets right now is the U.S. Federal Reserve's sudden, really pronounced dovish pivot. The core revelation here is truly significant. The Federal Reserve is now widely expected to cut rates by a substantial 50 basis points. That's at its very next meeting in September. This isn't just, speculation. It follows what's been described as a shocking jobs report last week, which clearly signaled a rapid deterioration in the labor market. This report evidently forced a sudden and, frankly, dramatic shift from previous Fed policymakers' somewhat complacent wait-and-see stance. You might recall there were already two dissenters at the previous meeting last month, signaling a growing internal dissatisfaction with the status quo. Now, that internal dissent appears to have become the prevailing sentiment.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is how quickly and decisively the shift has occurred within the Fed itself. And the public statements from key officials really highlight the urgency, don't they? Take San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly, for instance. She has publicly stated her nervousness, noting she's increasingly less comfortable with waiting. She's observing a broad dashboard of labor market measures, seeing evidence after piece of evidence of significant softening compared to just last year. And that's a crucial parallel, right? Because last year, similar labor market weakness prompted a 50 basis point cut in September, following a July hold. Daly explicitly warned that the current situation is even weaker. So this isn't just a slight dip, it's a systemic softening that, according to her, demands immediate attention. She also emphatically stated there's no evidence of tariff-driven inflation broadly seeping into the economy, directly challenging a key argument for maintaining higher rates. Her warning that waiting too long, say 6 months to a year, would mean the Fed would for sure be too late, well, that underscores a sense of real-time urgency. Her comments indicate that every meeting going forward is a live meeting for policy adjustments, and that more than two rate cuts might be needed if this labor market weakness persists without those inflationary pressures appearing.
And it's not just President Daly expressing this shift. Not at all. Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari has echoed her sentiments with striking clarity, stating he's no longer comfortable waiting on this inflation stuff that we don't see. Appearing on CNBC, he affirmed the economy is slowing, a statement he then quite dryly called Captain Obvious.
Captain Obvious, right.
Yeah, Kashkari stressed confidence in the mountain of evidence pointing to labor market weakness, contrasting it sharply with zero evidence for the inflation case. He openly questioned how long the Fed could possibly wait for tariff effects to become clear, given the pervasive economic cooling already taking hold. The critical takeaway here isn't just that a rate cut is coming, but that the Fed's internal consensus has dramatically and rapidly shifted towards an urgent recognition of labor market deterioration, signaling a much more aggressive easing cycle than previously anticipated. This isn't just a subtle pivot, it's a forced reversal driven by, undeniably deteriorating data, setting the stage for significant economic turbulence ahead.
Given these remarkably candid statements from within the Federal Reserve, it's perhaps unsurprising that financial markets have been pricing in such aggressive rate cuts for months now. We're seeing treasuries, money market options, swaps, and gold. They are all doubling, tripling, and even quadrupling down on negative economic scenarios that inevitably lead to lower and sustained low interest rates. This isn't just a prediction, it's a widespread market conviction. It really feels baked in.
That's precisely right. Gold, for example, is solidly in this category, trading near record highs. This behavior is perfectly consistent with market expectations of significantly lower future interest rates and a pervasive sense of economic pessimism. Its price, interestingly, dropped during what were described as deflationary outbursts in April, serving as a signal of funding collateral difficulties, as gold often functions as a collateral of last resort in times of stress.
Right, a crucial role.
Exactly. But then it surged higher after tariff delays were announced, indicating its continued role as a crucial hedge against broader monetary system issues. What this tells you, our listener, is that when Treasury yields are expected to go lower and stay lower, the opportunity cost of holding gold significantly decreases, making it a far more attractive asset. It's a real barometer of deep market anxiety.
Another stark and fascinating indicator of this deep pessimism is the copper-to-gold ratio. This ratio has been slammed down to new multi-decade lows, dipping below 0.008%. This deep plunge signals pervasive pessimism and, quite pointedly, a collective market bet against Fed Chair Jay Powell's previously optimistic view of the economy. To put it simply, copper is often seen as an indicator of industrial activity and global growth, right?
Got it.
While gold is a safe haven asset. So when copper plummets relative to gold, it suggests a profound lack of confidence in future economic expansion. Bond traders are rapidly ramping up their bets on Fed cuts, particularly a 50 basis point reduction in September, with probabilities rising for multiple cuts, potentially a total of 75 basis points in 2025 across the remaining meetings. The sheer volume of these bets underscores the market's conviction. It's not just a fringe view.
No, definitely not. And the swap market and the Treasury curve are also entirely consistent in signaling lower growth and inflation expectations. We're seeing what's called a bullish steepening of the Treasury curve. This is where long-term bond yields rise while short-term yields fall, a market signal that while immediate growth is slowing, investors anticipate either future inflation or aggressive Fed action down the road, perhaps driven by an economy that has, as one source put it, forgot how to grow, and it does seem to be remembering how to do worse in the short term, but also hedging against something else later. This all aligns with a market projection that once the Fed starts cutting, they can't stop.
The Pringles analogy.
Exactly, the Pringles adage. Once they pop, they can't stop. This projection is now being validated by all available evidence, suggesting deep and sustained economic shifts are on the horizon. And on top of all this, there are significant political implications. Adriana Kugler's recent resignation from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors creates an open seat. President Trump has stated he would make a decision on her replacement before the end of the week to make his imprint on the central bank's interest rate policy. The confluence of this overwhelming economic data and the potential for a politically aligned appointment makes a 50 basis point cut in September, mirroring a similar scenario from last summer, highly likely.
Okay, moving from the U.S. to China. Their economic challenges are deepening, particularly concerning their massive debt burden and widespread misallocation of resources. Peking University finance professor Michael Petta's analysis, which we've been tracking closely, reveals that China's real problem isn't just the sheer volume of debt, but what he calls systemic misallocation of resources and hidden economic losses. As of mid-2025, China's total social financing, a broad measure of credit, reached 430.2 trillion RMB, an 8.9% year-over-year increase. Contrast that with nominal GDP, which grew only 4.1% over the same period.
It's a huge gap.
It really is. This alarming divergence has pushed the official debt-to-GDP ratio from 103% at the end of 2024 to a staggering 309% just 6 months later. This kind of rapid escalation is simply, well, unsustainable.
And what's crucial here, as Professor Pettis points out, is that a full-blown financial crisis might be unlikely in China because of Beijing's tight control over the financial system. However, this control masks a much deeper, more insidious issue. Large-scale, unrecognized losses hidden across the country's balance sheets. These losses stem from years of excessive and increasingly unproductive investments, often made not for economic efficiency or market demand, but, to meet political growth targets, like building ghost cities or redundant infrastructure. Pettis vividly compares this to capitalizing expenses, essentially, turning economic losses into fictitious assets on paper, which artificially inflates reported values and, in turn, boosts GDP figures that don't reflect genuine economic vitality. This problematic pattern, he notes, truly began to accelerate around 2006-2008, setting the stage for the current predicament. The key insight here is that while Beijing's control prevents an overt crisis, it simultaneously masks a deep-seated, unsustainable misallocation that, if left unaddressed, will inevitably lead to a more chaotic reckoning down the line.
Professor Pettis is also highly critical of the recent proposal to transfer local government debt to the central government, a common suggestion for easing regional burdens, right? He argues this approach is flawed on three major grounds. First, it simply delays the necessary recognition of these colossal losses, just kicking the can further down the road. Second, it merely shifts debt servicing costs without actually reducing the systemic burden on the overall Chinese economy. And third, and perhaps most critically, it risks weakening the central government's balance sheet, which is currently the only major clean one left.
Okay.
Once that central balance sheet is compromised by absorbing these regional failures, China will have far fewer tools to manage future disruptions, whether economic or geopolitical. It fundamentally erodes their last bastion of fiscal strength.
Ultimately, these losses must eventually be recognized and allocated. It's unavoidable. Pettis explains that this can happen in one of two ways. Either proactively, through deliberate policy choices that distribute the pain in a controlled, strategic manner, perhaps through targeted write-downs or public acknowledgement of non-performing assets, or reactively through market forces once the system can no longer simply roll over the accumulated debt.
The messy way.
The very messy way. He warns that the latter route would be far more disruptive, generating immense uncertainty, widespread financial distress, and profound economic and political volatility. As different sectors scramble to avoid absorbing the inevitable losses, revaluing these overstated assets and accepting the painful economic consequences is, in his view, absolutely necessary. Necessary to restore credibility and achieve any semblance of sustainable, genuine growth. While Beijing still has significant policy space and centralized control, Pettis concludes it does not indefinitely. For you, our listener, this means China's economic stability, despite its monolithic appearance, rests on increasingly fragile foundations, with profound global ripple effects given its interconnectedness to the world economy.
Okay, now let's pivot to India, where trade tensions and an energy standoff with the US and EU are escalating significantly, adding another layer of complexity to the global chessboard that has emerged, 25 days into WW3? President Trump recently announced an additional 25% tariff on Indian imports, bringing the total to a staggering 50% starting this month.
Well, 50%.
Yeah. This punitive measure is directly attributed to India's continued purchase of Russian oil. The White House justified these levies as part of a broader strategy to pressure nations engaging with Moscow over the Ukraine war. Trump directly criticized India, stating, "They don't care how many people in Ukraine are being killed by the Russian war machine." This is a strong political statement tied directly to economic policy aimed at altering India's strategic calculations.
India's response has been swift, unified, and defiantly nationalistic, hasn't it? Their Ministry of External Affairs strongly condemned these tariffs as unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. They reiterated quite firmly that India's oil imports are based purely on market factors, prioritizing the most cost-effective sources, and are absolutely essential to serving the fundamental energy security needs of its 1.4 billion people. New Delhi has clearly signaled it has no intention of halting Russian oil imports, which currently account for roughly 2 million of India's 5 million barrels daily consumption, a significant portion of their energy mix.
A huge chunk.
Analysts widely believe India will not stop buying Russian oil, but may look to pivot more towards non-Russian barrels where possible to alleviate some pressure. This aggressive pressure, however, could paradoxically drive India closer to Russia, China, and other non-Western powers, potentially isolating Moscow less and pushing crucial U.S. partners away, undermining the very goal of the sanctions. Trump has also instructed a review of energy trade by other countries, including Turkey and China, for potential additional tariffs, indicating a broader strategy of economic coercion that could further fracture global trade relationships.
And the economic impact within India is already evident, creating immediate uncertainty. The Reserve Bank of India held its benchmark interest rate at 5.5% due to the tariff uncertainty, with the RBI governor warning that geopolitical and financial volatility remains a significant threat to growth despite maintaining a relatively optimistic 6.5% GDP forecast. This highlights the immediate uncertainty created by these trade actions, forcing India's central bank into a holding pattern. What's even more concerning and truly highlights the convoluted nature of global energy politics is the EU's parallel move.
Right, this is quite something.
The European Union is preparing sanctions against India for buying oil from Russia and Iran, following closely on Trump's heels. This is seen by many as a deliberate and frankly somewhat self-defeating strategy. Think about it. Russian oil goes to India, is refined, and then sold back to the EU at higher prices, effectively filling the very gap left by EU sanctions on direct Russian oil imports.
The loophole they encouraged.
Exactly. This arrangement, ironically, was previously encouraged by the Biden administration as a way to maintain some stability in global energy supply. Now, this abrupt reversal could lead to significantly higher energy costs for EU citizens. And as some critics controversially suggest, this could destroy Europe, with some commentators even implying these actions are driven by elites who, in their view, want to destroy Europe. It's a policy that seems to punish allies for pragmatic energy decisions.
And there is an intriguing, almost suspicious timing element to this, too. Ukrainian officials have allegedly found Indian components in a downed Russian drone. This finding, while unconfirmed in its broader implications, is being highlighted with conspicuous timing given these new tariffs on India.
Convenient timing.
Right. It's a detail that adds another layer of geopolitical intrigue to an already complex situation, raising questions about whether this discovery is genuinely new intelligence or, a convenient justification for pre-existing policy decisions. In terms of India's defense stance, it's worth noting that Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval is currently in Russia. To discuss S-400 missile systems, India already has 3 and is looking to acquire 2 more. This move sends a clear message of non-reliance on U.S. F-35s and serves to further strengthen BRICS ties, underlining India's strategic autonomy and its deepening alignment with the non-Western world in the face of escalating Western pressure. So, what does this all mean for the shifting geopolitical chessboard, especially 25 days into a global conflict? Let's turn to the escalating tensions and conflict zones.
Thank you. Let's shift our focus to the accelerating U.S.-China tech war, where the latest flashpoint centers on NVIDIA's H20 chips. These are less advanced products, notably approved for Chinese buyers after the U.S. barred sales of NVIDIA's flagship AI processors like the H100 and B200. However, Chinese regulators recently summoned NVIDIA representatives, citing potential national security concerns tied to U.S. proposals for chip traceability. Analysts view this not necessarily as an immediate ban, but more as a stark warning to NVIDIA for future products, and a clear signal to domestic firms to remain cautious. Beijing, it appears, is also sending a strong message that U.S. chip surveillance mechanisms could carry unacceptable risks for their national security and data integrity.
And these traceability concerns are very real for both sides, aren't they? U.S. officials are reportedly considering software or hardware-based location verification mechanisms within AI chips to better enforce export controls, ensuring these powerful technologies don't end up in the wrong hands, or perhaps more accurately, the wrong state's hands.
Right.
NVIDIA, for its part, has strongly rejected the idea of backdoors in a recent blog post, warning that they would undermine trust and open the door to cyber threats, a massive risk for a company built on trust and technological integrity. The stakes are certainly rising with every new development. In a related enforcement action that highlights the seriousness of these controls, 2 Chinese nationals were recently charged with smuggling NVIDIA H100 chips to China via shell companies set up in Singapore and Malaysia. If convicted, they face up to 20 years in prison, underscoring the severity with which these export violations are being treated.
But despite the escalating pressure and enforcement, the U.S. has shown some surprising flexibility in certain areas. Maybe. President Trump recently allowed NVIDIA to resume H20 chip sales to China, a move that, perhaps predictably, drew criticism from hawkish lawmakers but was welcomed by Chinese tech giants like ByteDance and Tencent, who were eager for any access to advanced AI hardware. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick defended this decision as strategic, arguing that it aims to keep Chinese developers dependent on U.S. technology, thereby maintaining a degree of influence and leverage.
A calculated risk, perhaps.
Perhaps. For Beijing, the NVIDIA case serves a dual purpose. It acts as leverage in broader trade negotiations, and it's also a powerful rallying point for domestic self-reliance, spurring indigenous innovation. Shares of domestic chip makers like SMEC jumped after news of the regulatory summons, signaling investor confidence in homegrown alternatives and an increased focus on accelerating domestic manufacturing efforts. As one analyst put it, quite pointedly, China wants the H20, but it's also using this moment to strengthen its position, leveraging every opportunity to reduce dependency. The future outlook for chip tracking mandates may well hinge on the outcome of a full summit between U.S. and Chinese leaders, as both sides appear intent on walking a tightrope in this entangled landscape of trade, technology, and national security, recognizing the immense global implications.
Shifting focus to China's internal landscape now, we're seeing a concerning resurgence of a health crisis that is, well, eerily familiar. More than 2 years after dismantling its stringent pandemic-era controls, China has reintroduced some of those measures in southern Guangdong province. In response to a major outbreak of the mosquito-borne chikungunya virus, the city of 4chan alone has recorded over 6,500 cases in less than a month, prompting local authorities to take action strikingly reminiscent of the zero-COVID days, a period many hoped was firmly in the past.
Indeed, the measures are striking in their scope and their chilling echo of a previous era. It's quite jarring. Pharmacies in 4chan are now mandated to collect the identities of individuals purchasing any of 47 medications associated with chikungunya symptoms, like fever, rash, and joint pain. Mass testing has resumed in certain districts, alongside requirements for recent travel history disclosures and community-wide disinfection campaigns. These steps have sparked considerable anxiety, fear, and even ridicule on Chinese social media, with users dubbing the response a return to 2020 and a familiar formula.
Understandably so.
Right. While authorities haven't imposed full lockdowns, this aggressive approach has rekindled memories of the sweeping, economically devastating COVID-19 measures, a devastation from which the Chinese economy is still very much recovering. For a population that endured such strict controls, this resurgence of similar measures, even for a different disease, is deeply unsettling.
And it's important to note that health experts are openly questioning the relevance of these widespread COVID-style interventions for a mosquito-borne illness. They emphasize that outbreak control for chikungunya should really focus on victim management and reducing human mosquito contact, rather than on person-to-person transmission measures, which are largely ineffective against a vector-borne disease.
Right, sense.
Complicating prevention efforts are both increasing international travel, which could spread the virus, and the ongoing flood season in the region, which provides ideal breeding grounds for mosquitoes. 4chan has launched a 7-day mosquito eradication campaign, including extensive disinfection drives, aggressive promotion of window screens and mosquito nets, and community engagement to eliminate stagnant water. Businesses that fail to comply face fines of up to $139 US, indicating the seriousness with which authorities are trying to enforce compliance. The measures have extended beyond 4chan, with cities like FJ and Chenal in Fen Province ordering 14-day self-monitoring for travelers from the city, and Zhejiang implementing similar advisories. The sheer scale of this outbreak and the revival of such restrictive measures are raising significant public concern about potential disruptions to daily life and the broader economic recovery, casting a shadow over China's stability.
Let's turn our attention now to the strategic importance of island control, specifically the case of Palau, a small Pacific island nation that is far from small in its geopolitical significance. Palau is strategically located at the end of the second island chain, a geographical line vital for the U.S. to contain Chinese expansion into the Pacific. Historically, this region was immensely important during World War II, and its strategic value has only grown. China is actively trying to gain influence in Palau, which is currently a staunch U.S. ally, and one of the few nations in the world that maintains diplomatic ties to Taiwan rather than Beijing, a point of considerable friction for the CCP.
And the methods China's employing are quite striking, often involving private land grabs by what are described as CCP stooges, individuals with deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party or state-affiliated entities. Take Angar Island, for instance. In 2010, Angar was even considered as an alternative location for a U.S. airbase.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Just 4 years later, Chinese investors began leasing land near Angar's airstrip and port for what they claimed would be a resort. One key figure involved was Tian Hong, also known as Hunter Tian. He's not just an investor, he's the president of the Palau Overseas Chinese Federation, which functions as an arm of the CCP's United Front Work Department. And he has documented ties to the Overseas Chinese Big Data Group, a company that works directly with Chinese military and public security organs.
So deeply connected.
Very. Tian leased about 250 acres of land directly near the potential U.S. airbase, though, thankfully, his leases have now expired. The U.S. military, meanwhile, completed a critical airfield renovation project on Angar in 2020, landed C-130s there that same year, and practiced HIMARS deployments in 2022, underscoring its growing importance. They've also spent over $118 million clearing 100 acres for a receiver for their Tactical Multi-Mission Over-the-Horizon Radar, or TACOR, a vital surveillance project announced back in 2017. The threat here is clear: the potential for spying on sensitive U.S. communications or even prepositioning Chinese drones to attack sensitive U.S. equipment, similar to tactics seen in Ukraine and Israel, where civilian infrastructure can mask military intent.
Another concerning figure involved in these land acquisition efforts was Wang Kwok-Koi, famously known as Broken Tooth, a former leader of the Macau 14K Triad, one of the largest Chinese organized crime groups.
Right, infamous character.
He also has alarming ties to the CCP's Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference and the PLA. In 2019, Wang announced audacious plans for a casino resort in Angar, where he aimed to control customs, ports, and even an airport. essentially creating a Chinese-controlled enclave within Palau. He was also interested in land next to a second Takor transmitter site 60 miles north in OK State, demonstrating a clear strategic interest in U.S. military assets. Wang was blacklisted by the U.S. Treasury in 2020 for drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and human trafficking, and his plans ended when he was fortunately banned from the country.
Good.
However, others have stepped in to fill the void. Tin Shu-chun, a CCP member leading a United Front Tide association, has held property in OK since 2015. After a U.S. public hearing on Takor in 2023, he registered plans for a 275-room hotel directly overlooking the transmitter, raising obvious concerns about espionage. And Zhang Yongrang, tied to the Fujian Mafia, owns the Belmont Hotel near Malakal Harbor in Kor, where the U.S. military plans to expand the wharf for larger vessels. He, too, is now banned from the country.
In response to these aggressive influence campaigns, the U.S. and Palau are taking active countermeasures. The U.S. Embassy is actively distributing intelligence reports about Chinese influence and illicit activities to Palau officials, arming them with the information needed to resist. The U.S. is also expanding national security reviews of real estate deals near sensitive military bases, a critical step to prevent similar incursions. Palau, for its part, has been commendably proactive, deporting dozens of individuals, denying visas and work permits, and adding names to an undesirable aliens list, including the owner of the Belmont Hotel.
Taking it seriously.
They are. The U.S. Embassy has even requested more assistance in the Trump administration, including a senior U.S. law enforcement official experienced in combating Chinese organized crime, a DEA agent for trafficking and corruption, 5 U.S. police officers, and 2 prosecutors, recognizing the need for specialized expertise. However, there's been no public word on Trump's approval for this increased assistance. And surprisingly, the DoD actually canceled the final months of a security assistance contract in Palau, raising questions about commitment. The urgency here cannot be overstated. The Pacific Islands have been historically deprioritized by Washington, but are now seen, quite rightly, as the front lines of a war with China.
Okay, moving to Europe now, we're seeing some significant defense realignments, particularly with Italy's approval of the long-delayed Sicily Bridge project. The Italian government has finally approved the 13.5 billion euro construction of a 3.3-kilometer suspension bridge, linking Sicily to the mainland across the Messina Strait. What's particularly noteworthy is its strategic rebranding. Originally conceived purely as an economic development project to boost Sicily's economy, it's now being touted as crucial to national defense and NATO commitments.
Interesting pivot.
Very. This shift in justification is as significant as the project itself.
Prime Minister Meloni's administration claims this bridge will significantly enhance military mobility for Italian and allied forces, especially given the presence of key NATO bases in southern Italy. They argue it's essential to defend the security of a geopolitically sensitive Mediterranean. Aligning with Italy's pledge to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035, with 1.5% specifically earmarked for strategic infrastructure projects like this. However, defense experts have openly questioned this strategic logic, noting it does little to aid NATO's main concern, rapid redeployment of forces to Eastern Europe in case of Russian aggression.
Right, the core mission.
Exactly. As one expert rather pointedly put it, if you have to go east, it's either via the Adriatic, via plane, or via the Alps. Implying the bridge's utility for core NATO defense needs is minimal. It appears the defense angle might be more about securing funding and political will than, actual military necessity.
Historically, the dream of connecting Sicily to the mainland dates back to antiquity, with Roman war elephants famously transported across the strait on rafts, apparently. It became a national priority in the 1970s, but has stalled repeatedly since then due to persistent fiscal and structural concerns, not to mention environmental impact worries. The projected costs have also surged dramatically, from an early estimate of 4.4 billion euros to the current staggering 13.5 billion euros.
Huge increase.
Local opposition in Messina remains strong, with residents objecting to the massive urban changes, train station relocation, and neighborhood demolitions that the project would entail. Military planners also note its high vulnerability to attack in a conflict scenario, and the potential need for dedicated air and sea defenses, which would add even more cost. Despite these criticisms and practical drawbacks, the government clearly sees the bridge's symbolic and strategic weight as worth the price, especially amid hybrid threats and growing Russian influence in North Africa, suggesting it's more about projecting national resolve and influence than purely logistical military benefit.
Now, turning to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the related diplomatic maneuvers, particularly those involving President Trump, He consistently refers to it as Biden's war
Yeah.
and claims he's working hard to end it, even asserting he's stopped 5 wars in the last 5 months, which is a statement.
A bold claim.
Yet despite this rhetoric, he recently greenlit another $200 million in weapons to protect Ukraine, a seemingly contradictory move. What's striking and quite concerning is his apparent lack of awareness regarding Ukraine's controversial conscription practices, including the enlistment of elderly and mentally handicapped individuals and reports of the forced kidnapping of unwilling conscripts from the streets. When asked about these harrowing reports, Trump dismisses them with a casual, "I don't know about that," indicating either a profound disinterest or a deliberate avoidance of uncomfortable truths.
The diplomatic front, meanwhile, is certainly active, albeit with opaque motives. Senior U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff recently met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow, a high-stakes meeting that signals a direct line of communication at the highest levels. A statement from President Trump is expected post-meeting, potentially delivering an ultimatum. Putin must agree to the Kellogg ceasefire plan, the details of which remain somewhat vague or face 100% sanctions on Russia and secondary sanctions on countries that trade with Russia, specifically naming China and India, and a complete tariff Armageddon on their trade with the U.S.
High stakes indeed.
Extremely. Interestingly, Bloomberg reports that Russia is weighing an offer for a Ukraine air truce, which would entail no drones, no missiles, and a no-fly zone contingent on Ukraine's agreement. This, they hope, would avert Trump's threatened tariff Armageddon, suggesting a strategic Russian play to exploit potential divisions.
Trump is also planning to target Russia's shadow fleet ships, not insured by London. A bold move that previous administrations, including Biden's and EU officials, failed to bring down due to its elusive nature. However, CNN warns that such secondary sanctions, especially those aimed at crucial partners like China and India, would hurt America's own economy. Through more expensive consumer goods, lower profit margins for American companies, and possibly higher oil prices, directly undermining any domestic economic gains.
A potential own goal.
Could be. There's a cynical view, expressed by some analysts, that Trump knows that the sanctions are not going to work because Russians are wily characters adept at circumvention, but will proceed anyway as it's become ritualistic for U.S. foreign policy. Adding to the complexity, Andrei Yermak, a Ukrainian official, claims Indian components were found in a downed Russian drone, a finding with suspiciously convenient timing given the new tariffs on India, raising questions about a potential political motive for the leak.
That timing again.
Yermak also allegedly wrote a Washington Post article titled, "How to Shut Down Putin's War Machine," advocating for more money, weapons, and sanctions on Russia, China, India, and Iran. This perspective is seen by some commentators as aiming to destroy Russia using Ukraine as the proxy, but in order to destroy Russia, the collective West is destroying itself, arguing that such an aggressive, expansive sanctions regime will ultimately backfire on Western economies.
Finally, in a different regional peace effort that speaks to America's broader diplomatic aspirations, President Trump is preparing for a peace treaty signing event in Washington, D.C. at the White House. For Azerbaijan and Armenia, two nations that have been locked in a bitter conflict for 30 years. This is clearly aimed at securing a significant big win for Trump on the international stage, potentially bringing him closer to a Nobel Peace Prize, a long-stated ambition. A key sticking point in negotiations has been the corridor that connects Azerbaijan's isolated enclave through Armenian territory, a critical logistical and sovereignty issue. Proposed solutions involving U.S. monitoring or a private company both face rejection from the respective parties, indicating deeply entrenched mistrust. Meanwhile, Armenia's Prime Minister Pashinyan is pushing hard for a strategic shift into NATO and the EU, a move that some analysts view as a very big trap, given Azerbaijan's unresolved territorial ambitions and potential for further aggression. This push is seen by some as being driven by a lot of money to be made for the elites involved, rather than a genuine strategic advantage for Armenia itself.
From the global economic and geopolitical dances we've just explored, let's bring the discussion back to what's happening within the United States. Because, as we always say, everything is connected, and the domestic picture is certainly complex, especially 25 days into WW3. We've seen a number of internal security and governance challenges recently. A mass shooting was reported at Fort Stewart in Georgia, resulting in 5 wounded casualties at the headquarters of the 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team. The shooter was apprehended at the scene and identified by local media as Army Sergeant Cornelius Radford, though this remains unconfirmed through official channels. The victims are being treated at a local hospital. This incident, on a military base, raises immediate concerns about internal stability.
And in Washington, D.C., there's a significant proposal to federalize the city's administration, a long-debated concept that now has renewed urgency. This follows a violent attack on a Doge department staffer, Edward Korstein, a key software engineer, who was severely beaten while trying to stop a carjacking. President Trump has since publicly vowed to federalize D.C. and begin a crackdown on crime, leveraging this incident to push for more direct federal control.
It's been talked about for ages.
Exactly. And if it happens, it would place D.C.'s administration directly under U.S. government control, likely leading to mass firings of the leadership of the dozens of overlapping law enforcement agencies in the area. Washington, D.C. is, unfortunately, infamous for street crime running rampant just a few streets over from the White House,
Why?
with even Secret Service agents experiencing attempted carjackings, highlighting a pervasive breakdown in urban security. For you, our listener, this proposal raises questions about local autonomy versus federal intervention in areas traditionally managed by city governments.
When we look at the broader U.S. economic overview and President Trump's policies, it's a remarkably complex picture. It really is. The sheer volume of often revised statistics makes it incredibly hard to ascertain what's truly happening on the ground. To gain a granular understanding, it's crucial to look beyond just the numbers and consider the nuances of American society, daily life, and the intricate web of politics. Because, as we often say, everything is connected to everything else. The economy isn't just data points, it's people's livelihoods and experiences.
A fascinating microcosm of this complexity can be seen in Las Vegas, which is currently experiencing a significant downturn. This is largely due to declining international tourism, partly attributed to what's been called the Trump effect, and fears of deportation among potential visitors, as well as broader declining immigration rates. Las Vegas's unique transition from mob Vegas to billionaire oligarch Vegas and now to corporate Vegas.
Quite a journey.
It has resulted in a proliferation of nitpicking fees and a general atmosphere that's less appealing to the middle American tourists who once flocked there. Additionally, the widespread legalization of gambling across the U.S. has significantly reduced Vegas's unique appeal, dispersing its former monopolistic draw.
In terms of long-term economic problems that particularly impact Trump's voter base, we've seen the financialization of the U.S. economy, especially for the working class in the industrial Midwest, often tragically called the Rust Belt. This region has witnessed a dramatic decline in manufacturing jobs, falling from 20 million to under 12 million, though it's now back up to around 13 million, still significantly lower than its peak. This hollowing out of traditional industries, coupled with what's been termed a war on old energy, particularly the coal mining industry, has profoundly shifted traditional Democratic voters towards Trump as they feel economically abandoned.
That realignment is key.
Absolutely. The irony, as the sources point out, is that China continues to add coal mines daily, highlighting the starkly divergent global energy strategies and their impact on different populations.
Short-term economic problems, often linked to previous administration policies, included massive government spending, which, while stimulating, also created a disproportionate number of direct and indirect government jobs. This spending was, at times, weaponized for political purposes, such as through widespread DEI initiatives, diverting resources and focus. We also saw mass immigration, estimated at 10 to 20 million, mostly illegal, which, while boosting top-line GDP figures, didn't translate into tangible benefits for ordinary workers, particularly with no growth in native-born American civilian job employment.
Stagnant for many.
Right. Real wages also declined relative to inflation during this period, and a significant inflationary cycle was triggered by this government spending, coupled with global lockdown distortions and supply chain chaos.
Trump's Economic Balancing Act has aimed to counter these deeply entrenched trends. His new trade and tax policies are designed to incentivize manufacturing in the United States, offering benefits like accelerated depreciation for new factories and proposing tax cuts on tips and overtime for workers. He's had some notable, measurable successes in these efforts. There's been dramatic growth in native-born American workers and civilian employment for the first time in 5 years, and critically, real wages have grown above the cost of living, also a first in half a decade.
That's significant progress.
It is. These successes are largely attributed to what some call self-deportations of foreign-born workers, a psychological effect stemming from Trump's enhanced immigration enforcement and raids, which led to a reallocation of job resources to native-born workers. He's also been systematically cutting non-defense government spending, aiming to shift employment opportunities towards the more productive private sector. Furthermore, energy costs globally, particularly for oil and gas, have declined by about 10% in the U.S., which is the biggest input cost for imports and a major factor in the cost of living, driven in part by Russia and Saudi Arabia increasing production. For you, our listener, this means a direct impact on your wallet at the gas pump and grocery store.
However, despite these successes, there are significant and potent risks to Trump's economic plan. Big risks. One major concern is his new policy of using tariffs for political partisan purposes rather than purely industrial economic policy. This approach, targeting countries like Russia and India, jeopardizes his broader industrial policy. There's a tangible legal risk. The U.S. Court of International Trade and the Court of Federal Claims could rule that these tariffs are outside his constitutional and congressional authority.
A major legal hurdle.
Potentially. Judges in these courts are perceived as hostile to Trump, viewing these tariffs as extending beyond traditional trade deficit issues to military, political, or sanction-related reasons, potentially setting a dangerous precedent. A decision is expected in the next month or so and could unravel his trade strategy. The economic risk is equally high. Imposing massive secondary sanctions on major Russian oil importers like China and India could cause global oil prices to spike, anywhere from 25–50% or even quadruple.
Crippling.
Absolutely. This would immediately unravel the real wage gains seen so far and make key U.S. industries like steel and aluminum uncompetitive on the global stage, severely undermining his manufacturing resurgence.
Another critical risk factor is interest rates, which are currently a major impediment to economic vitality. Just huge. High interest rates are freezing the housing market, making homes the most unaffordable in history, crushing the dreams of new homeowners, and crippling commercial real estate, which is suffering from empty offices and malls after years of remote work and changing consumer habits. This situation is stifling crucial private investment. We're already seeing a billion-dollar meltdown in commercial real estate. For example, a Denver office tower's value was recently reassessed at a shocking $115 million, a stunning 76% drop from its 2019 value.
76%.
Wow. Yeah. This means the highest tranche of bonds tied to this property is now underwater. To put it simply, imagine a large loan, like for this office tower, being sliced into different layers of risk, or tranches. The safest top layers were supposed to be secure, but now even they're losing value, and lower tranches have been wiped out.
The contagion risk.
Exactly. This price discovery risk means the true depreciated value of buildings is becoming known, hitting banks hard, especially small and mid-sized regional banks, who hold significant amounts of these commercial mortgage-backed securities, or CMBS. Up to 5–10% of their assets, a potentially systemic threat. Delinquency rates are already rising, now between 5.5% and 6%. Central banks, like the Bundesbank in Germany, are described as playing chase and have no power to fix fundamental structural issues like demand drops or a real estate collapse with mere rate cuts. Germany, in particular, is facing an insolvency tsunami, with the highest number of corporate insolvencies in 20 years, indicating a serious erosion of economic substance.
Grim picture there.
The Fed, specifically Jay Powell, is seen by many as behind the curve and is likely to massively slash rates only after delinquency rates confirm widespread economic stress. Trump urgently needs interest rates to come down to unlock manufacturing, commercial, and residential real estate investment. But there's a real concern that segments of the Fed, disliking Trump, might intentionally keep rates high to undermine his tariff and broader economic policy.
And beyond real estate, the stock market's weakness is another persistent concern. Outside of the Magnificent Seven, the AI-driven tech stocks that have captured so much attention, the broader stock market hasn't grown much, indicating a lack of widespread economic health. Critically, AI and tech, while powerful and transformative, don't necessarily create many highly paid U.S. jobs at scale, which is a disconnect for the broader employment picture and general prosperity.
Important distinction.
The economic impact of immigration is also a colossal economic fact that shapes everything. We're talking about 2 to 3 million fewer immigrants and 1 million foreign-born workers leaving the U.S., which is arguably a bigger fact than tariffs in explaining the economy's current state. While national income might not grow as fast due to this population shift, real wages and job growth for native-born Americans are improving due to this reallocation of resources. This shift could lead to actual developmental growth as opposed to growth without development, where GDP rises simply due to population increases, but living standards can actually fall for the existing population. It's a complex trade-off that has profound societal implications.
The politics of these, well, potentially self-destructive policies are, frankly, quite confusing and raise questions about internal consistency. Why would Trump jeopardize his own industrial policy with tariffs that risk spiking energy costs, especially given the U.S.'s critical dependence on rare earths, where China holds a staggering 90–95% monopoly?
The Achilles heel.
Right. China, it's argued, has escalatory domination in rare earths, which are absolutely crucial for the U.S. defense industry and its technological independence. Furthermore, the tariffs on India, which isn't a major trade partner for the U.S. in terms of direct trade volume, but is crucial for U.S. agriculture, are suspiciously linked by some to big agricultural donors to the America First Policy Institute, suggesting potential political motivations over economic ones.
Following the money.
This approach, many argue, is inadvertently pushing BRICS nations closer together, reinforcing their urgent need for independent trade, payment systems, and security arrangements outside of Western influence. It's also worth noting the Trump family's financial ties to crypto, with Truth Social reportedly becoming a crypto engine, potentially influencing policy, example Secduge being less aggressive on the industry that favors dollar dominance but not necessarily dollar strength, creating a complex web of motivations.
Shifting to some global reflections and curious observations that give us a sense of the broader clown world phenomenon, as some sources call it. We've seen some intriguing developments. Ukraine's anti-corruption agency, NABU, has reportedly found a large-scale military bribery scheme with up to 30% kickbacks on drone and electronic warfare contracts. This is somewhat bizarrely being spun by some as a positive development, suggesting it's now safe for the U.S. to send money to Project Ukraine because the corruption is being rooted out.
The spin is incredible.
Elsewhere, Lithuania's government has collapsed, with the finance minister taking over as temporary prime minister, following a corruption scandal that led to their government being described as plagued by internal division and scandal.
And as for President Trump's other actions and future ambitions,
Clark?
he has publicly stated that he's not going to run for a third term, which of course he is not eligible for under U.S. law.
Right. Term limits.
He has also kind of endorsed J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio as potential future AGA leaders, signaling his preferred successors. In a less political vein, Diddy's lawyer has confirmed approaching the Trump administration for a pardon. On the legal front, the U.S. House is set to subpoena the Clintons, former FBI directors Comey and Mueller, and several former attorney generals, for an oversight probe involving Epstein, with depositions set to begin August 1819 and run through mid-October, seen by many as strategic delay tactics to prolong political narratives.
In trade relations, Trump has made bold claims, stating he secured $600 billion in EU investment as a gift to the U.S., which he can invest anywhere he wants. Ursula von der Leyen, the EU commissioner, reportedly sat silently nodding when Trump announced this, an image that caused quite a stir.
Yeah, that got a lot of attention.
However, the EU is now saying it cannot possibly invest this amount, creating a public dispute. Trump is threatening 30–35% tariffs if they don't follow through, stating, "I knew this was going to happen," implying a preemptive skepticism about the EU's commitment. Finally, on the conflict front, the Russian military has reportedly smashed the Odessa region with drones and possibly Iskanders, allegedly targeting the Oroka gas compression station, a key point where Azerbaijan was sending energy to Europe through Ukraine. This strike, visible even from Romania, is interpreted by analysts as a clear and deliberate warning to Azerbaijan, signaling that its energy infrastructure is not off-limits.
What a dense and interconnected web of events we've unpacked today. Really is. From the shifting economic sands of U.S. interest rates and China's debt challenges, to the escalating tech wars, the strategic moves in the Pacific, and the multifaceted conflicts and diplomatic dance across Europe and Asia. Our goal, as always, is to help you, our listener, grasp these complex relationships and understand the immense forces at play in a world that is fundamentally reshaping itself day by day, 25 days into WW3.
Indeed. If we connect all these seemingly disparate threads, from the Federal Reserve's dovish pivot and China's economic fragility to the global trade wars and the localized conflicts in Ukraine and the strategic island plays, it raises an important question, doesn't it? In a world where the lines between economic stability, political maneuvering, and open conflict are increasingly blurred, how do we, as global citizens, navigate such rapid and fundamental shifts in the global order? Consider how these elements, from the price of gold to the fate of a bridge in Sicily, from a rare disease outbreak to a specific chips export, are not just individual headlines, but perhaps the very fabric being rewoven into a new global tapestry, one that is still very much in flux, demanding our constant attention and critical thought.
We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer lens through which to view these momentous times. If you found value in this deep dive, please consider liking this episode, subscribing for more daily updates, and supporting our work on our GoFundMe page. Your engagement helps us continue to produce these in-depth analyses. Until our next deep dive, stay curious, stay informed, and thank you for joining us.